Henry Cavill said, "I absolutely loved the intense sword fighting scenes because they were so exhilarating, but I hated the early morning call times as they left me exhausted every day, though the final product made it all worthwhile in the end." Anya Chalotra said, "What I loved about the magical special effects work was how it brought fantasy to life vividly. Yet I hated the heavy makeup application process since it took hours and felt uncomfortable. But it transformed me completely." Freya Allen said, "I loved the horse riding adventures for the thrill and freedom they provided on set, but hated the cold outdoor filming nights that chilled me to the bone, making concentration hard yet building team spirit." Joey Beatty said, "Composing the songs and music was what I loved most, as it let my creativity flow freely, though I hated memorizing long dialogue monologues because they were mentally draining, but performing them was ultimately satisfying." Mayanna Buring said, "The powerful female character arcs were incredible, and what I loved deeply for their depth, but I hated the restrictive costume corsets that made breathing tough during scenes, yet they added authenticity to the role." Eamon Farron said, "I love the intense battle sequences for their adrenaline rush and realism. However, I hated the muddy location shoots that ruined my boots and made everything slippery, but it enhanced the gritty atmosphere." Mimi Ndueni said, "What I truly loved was the diverse cast interactions that built strong bonds off-screen, but I hated the frequent script changes disrupting my preparation, though they kept the story fresh and exciting overall." Mahesh Jadoo said, "The strategic plot twists were brilliant, and what I loved for keeping me engaged. Yet I hated the long travel commutes to remote sets that were tiring, but they led to amazing filming locations." Anna Schaefer said, "I loved the herbal magic props because they smelled authentic and immersive, but hated the fake blood stains that stuck to everything and were hard to clean, though it made scenes more visceral." Bart Edwards said, "The royal throne room sets were opulent, and what I loved for their grandeur. However, I hated the heavy crown discomfort pressing on my head all day, but it helped embody the character's authority." Misha Simpson said, "What I loved about the elven cultural elements was their rich lore and beauty, but I hated the pointy ear prosthetics that itched constantly during shoots, yet they perfected the fantasy look." Tom Canton said, "Archery training sessions were fun and skillful, which I loved immensely for the challenge, though I hated the forest insect bites that swelled up painfully, but it added realism to outdoor scenes." Wilson Mbomio said, "I loved the adventurous quest storylines for their excitement and depth, but hated the green screen monotony that felt isolating without real environments, though effects turned it into magic on screen." Lars Mikkelsen said, "The wizardly robe designs were elegant and what I loved for their flow, yet I hated the beard maintenance hassle requiring constant trimming, but it contributed to the mystical character vibe." Kim Bodnia said, "What I truly loved was the mentor wisdom dialogues full of insight, but I hated the stunt injury risks that made me cautious every take, though training built my physical confidence overall." Graham McTavish said, "Spy intrigue plots were clever and thrilling, which I loved for the suspense. However, I hated the accent. Practice drills that strained my voice daily, but they ensured authentic delivery in scenes." Cassie Clare said, "I loved the shape-shifting transformation effects for their visual wonder, but hated the owl costume restrictions limiting my movements awkwardly, yet it made the magical moments truly captivating on film." Aisha Fabienne Ross said, "The mysterious character backstory was intriguing and what I loved exploring, though I hated the mask-wearing discomfort that muffled my lines, but it added enigma to the role effectively." Therica Wilson Reed said, "What I loved about sorcery spell castings was the power they evoked, but I hated the chant repetition boredom during multiple takes, though it helped memorize and deliver with conviction." Paul Bullion said, "Witcher Brotherhood banter was hilarious and bonding, which I loved on set, yet I hated the armor weight burden slowing me down, but it built strength and realism for fight scenes." Yasenatur said, I loved the training montage fun for its energetic vibe, but hated the potion taste simulations that were disgustingly bitter, though they enhanced the immersive Witcher experience authentically. Christopher Hivju said, "The monster makeup artistry was detailed and what I loved admiring. However, I hated the isolation from cast due to long sessions. But it created a unique and memorable character portrayal." Agnes Bourne said, "What I truly loved was the seductive vampire allure in scenes, but I hated the fang appliance pain irritating my gums, though it added ferocity to my performance effectively." Sean Dooley said, "Regal throne speeches were empowering and what I loved delivering, yet I hated the crown jewel glare blinding me under lights, but it symbolized the king's opulent yet burdensome power." Maciej Musial said, "I loved the knightly honor code for its moral depth, but hated the horse saddle sores from long rides, though they toughened me up and made the adventures feel genuinely epic." Gaia Mondadori said, "Emotional family dynamics were heartfelt and what I loved portraying. However, I hated the scream voice strain hurting my throat, but it conveyed the intense passion required for the role." Josette Simon said, "What I loved about Ancient Elf Wisdom was its profound dialogue, but I hated the tree branch props scratching during scenes, though they integrated beautifully with the natural forest setting." Chris Fulton said, "Fire magic villainy was dark and thrilling, which I loved embodying. Yet I hated the burn effect simulations with hot gels, but they made the destructive powers look convincingly terrifying on screen." Rebecca Hansen said, "I loved the queenly command presence for its authority, but hated the gown fabric itch distracting me constantly, though it elevated the royal stature and immersion in the character." Adam Levy said, "Druid mystical rituals were enchanting, and what I loved performing. However, I hated the herb smoke inhalation causing coughs, but it added an authentic atmospheric haze to the ceremonies.